So today we're here to talk to you about community relations and policing. But I want to
Mhm.
start at the beginning and ask you first, what was your introduction to policing? Like as a kid, maybe the first experience you had with it.
The first time I ever noticed the police in my community, it's when people were stealing cars and the police were chasing them through the community. And it was always funny to me that the police could never catch the kids stealing the cars. The kids were young and fast and in good shape. The police, not so much.
Would you say growing up, the police were people you could relate to in a way?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Growing up in inner city Boston, um, we didn't hate the police, but my parents told me not to mess with them. They said, if they ask you questions, answer them, but don't bother them, they won't bother you. And I grew up not seeing the police as friends, and they were just like necessary evils, and I just tried to stay away from the police.
Uh, my next question was going to be, can you remember the moment when you decided this career would be for you? But what really started that change for you to view policing differently from a necessary evil to something that could be a possible and then eventually your career path?
Now, those are very different questions. If the question is, when did I decide this career is for me? I still haven't decided that yet. So I'm still working through that. But so I wish I had a better story. I wish I said that. I wish I could tell you that I wanted to save the world and policing was this great thing. That's why I joined, but that's actually not it at all. Coming out of college, going into my senior year, my brother was already a firefighter, and he didn't go to college. I did, and he was teasing me that I wasted money in college. And he took the civil service test and got a 92 and said I didn't even go to college. I then took the police civil service test just to spite my brother to show him that I'm smarter than him because he got a 92. I got a 98. Never did I want to get a job in policing. When I was graduating college, I wanted to go into air traffic control. But the sheriff's office called first, and I figured I would do that for about 6 months and then get a real job. And then 14 and a half years later, I was still in it, but was earning a PhD. So never did I think this was a job that I wanted. I just kind of fell into it.
Would you say policing for you is an avenue to achieve greater things in the sense of community empowerment or betterment?
I never looked at it like that because my ultimate goal wasn't to fix the community. My job was I was in policing and I saw everything that they were doing wrong, and I just wanted to be different. But again, I also patrolled the community that I grew up in. So I knew everybody. And the reason I treated people with dignity and respect was because I was afraid that somebody was going to call my dad or my mom or my grandmother and say, Lorenzo's out here acting a fool. And many of the people that I saw, some of the folks that I arrested on Sunday, I saw their family in church. So even though I have to do my job, at least I can say I treated your people with dignity and respect.
So it sounds when you were in policing, you were thoroughly connected with the community. So how would you
Absolutely.
describe those
Absolutely.
early days of policing for you?
Give me the question again.
How would you describe those early days of policing for you? Like moments that stand out or shaped your view of policing?
So for me, it was never a case of I needed to get the bad guy. That was never what I thought because most of the people that were the bad guy were family members and neighbors and friends. So I knew who they were. I knew all the dirt that they were in. My job was more of a protector. So when I drove around and I saw people's grandparents, I would get out of the car and go sit with them on a porch and talk to them and don't let them be like eating cake or something. I'm introducing myself or whatever. But my job was to protect people who needed protection. And the folks that were doing dirt, my position was It was never, you can't do that. My position was, you can't do that here. Because I understood that the people out there, they're trying to make money and take care of their family too. I get it. You just can't do that here. We need to protect the folks here. You need to go do that somewhere else.
So would you say your perspective on policing has changed over time, or do you hold that same attitudes and beliefs that you had when you first started?
Well, both. I absolutely hold the same belief system, and folks do what they need to do to survive. I get that. You know, there are people that because of poverty or because of situations, they're put in positions that most of us wouldn't be in. And they're forced to do stuff to survive that most of us don't have to do. So I acknowledge that. I get that. But while you're doing that, you can't hurt other people. So my position is still whatever you're going to do, you just can't hurt innocent people.
That's a great stance to have on all that because, as we know, there's a lot of gray areas when it comes to policing, and that's why we're having these conversations today. Both lives are at risk. So, how would you
So
describe?
let me just say this before we move forward.
Mhm.
There was a line on in Biggie's song where he said, "This is for all the people that called the police on me when I was selling drugs in front of my building because I just had to, get food to take care of my daughter." That's real in the community that I grew up in, and these are folks that were it not for illegal enterprise, they wouldn't have money. So I get what's going on. I'm opposed to it. I know it's illegal, but a lot of times I understand. And for me, the way you view the problem dictates the way you view the solution. So I never viewed them as bad people. I viewed them as people that were making bad decisions. And for me, that was a major change.
So, would you say that's the defining thing that's changed about your attitudes and views towards policing? That the intentions behind it, or the thoughts of, or I guess understanding the people behind the actions.
My position is that, and it's a two-way street. The more people understood the community that they were policing, they would police them differently. The flip side is the more community members understand the job of the police, they would interact with the police differently. So it's understanding. The more as we ask the police to build bridges to the community, I want the community to build bridges toward the police. It's a two-way street.
So, how would you describe the current police community relationship, like nationwide, or at least how it's depicted?
So most people don't hate the police at all. Most people are pretty ambivalent. Most people don't care one way or the other because most people don't interact with the police. There's a group of people that absolutely hate the police and see them as the enemy. There's also another group of people on the opposite end that think the police can do no wrong and they're the only thing keeping us from anarchy. Most of the people in the middle understand the police got a job to do, and outside of a traffic ticket, I don't ever interact with the police. So I don't care. And I was doing a community meeting, and a city councilor said to me, I view the police the same way I view the garbage man. And she said, every Wednesday, I pull my trash out to the curb and I go to work. At the end of the day, when I come home, my can is empty and I bring my can back in. I never think about who the person is doing the job. I don't think about their family. I don't think if they're black or white or male or female. I just know that some human has a job that they do. And if they don't do the job, then it's problematic. I think most people view the police like that. Most people don't know the police. For most people, the police are this faceless entity that do whatever it is that they do, but they don't care one way or the other. You know, most of middle America don't have strong opinions toward the police.
Would you say it's always been like that since you've grown up and entered the police force till now, or would you say it's just now becoming like this faceless entity?
I think it's mostly becoming that now.
Okay.
Um, Most of the time, people just assume that the police were the good guys, and they assume that if the police said it, it's true. Up until probably 15 or 20 years ago, we never questioned the police. If they said it, we just assumed it was true. Now that we're realizing, wait a minute, there are some people in police that actually lie. There are some people in policing that are actually corrupt. There are some people in policing that are more criminal than the people that they arrest. So finally, we're removing the blinders and we're starting to see that this is the case. So now we're questioning police more. The problem comes when you start questioning the police and they're not used to being questioned, then they start claiming victimhood. The community hates us, and why are you turning on us? And you're familiar with the term white fragility, where white people don't have to deal with race that often. So when we bring race to them, then they're really uncomfortable about it. So there's a term that I use called blue fragility. That's in my new book, Policing in the US. The term blue fragility, based on white fragility, it's the police for generations have never been questioned. But now that we're starting to question them and hold them accountable, they now feel like they're the victim, like society is turning against them. So I call that blue fragility. And that the police, to me, a lot of times when you question the police and ask them to verify stuff or prove stuff, the police kind of get like a Drake song, and they're like all in their feelings now. And they don't want to, have to answer questions. But it's about accountability. The police hold the community accountable, that's their job. And since the murder of George Floyd, most jurisdictions have passed a police accountability bill that said that the police have a duty to intervene. The problem is the job of police is to intervene. The fact that we have to make a law to say that now you have to intervene when your partners and your boys in blue do something wrong, you should have intervened initially. So I think we're starting to correct the path of policing. And we're going to see, I think, over the next decade, there's going to be better police community interaction.
So would you say a part of this is things like cameras, social media, putting a spotlight on things that maybe you always saw growing up or people in that minority always saw or understood growing up?
Yeah, because a lot of times all we had was the police officer's report. That was the only thing we had to say what actually happened. But now, because of camera phones and stuff, we got people with phones now recording the police. And then we realized, wait a minute, everything the police said is actually not true. And now with officers wearing body cameras, we can see actually what's happening now. So we don't have to account for the police's memory. And I'm not implying that the police are purposefully being evasive or they're purposefully lying. But my perspective of danger when I see something may be very different than yours when you're watching it. And all we have is the officer's perspective. So now we actually have video, and that's about levels of accountability. And to me, having video is good for the police as well, because there's a lot of times when citizens say stuff or when citizens videotape the police and edit it in a certain way. Now we got the body cam that shows the whole thing. So wearing body cam actually protects the police and the community.
Yeah, the line of policing, from what I understand, deals with a lot of subjectivity. It's a lot of
Absolutely.
for interpretation, especially when it comes to dealing with sides, civil complaints, things like that. Are there any experiences or that you've had with the subjectivity that made you question your career path?
Every single day it happens. There are times that people feel offended or disrespected, and then the police being disrespected, they'll amp it up a notch or two. Like, you can't talk to me like that. So now I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna arrest you. And if you resist, now I'm gonna say you were resisting. And if I'm throwing blows at you and you throw a blow at me, now I got you for assault and battery on a police officer, when ultimately this started because you felt disrespected. So that's hugely problematic. And a lot of times the officers that are not good will rely on that quite a bit.
So how would you describe that relationship thing between police officer and citizen, or how it should be, these relationships?
Sir Robert Peel, who's the father of modern policing, said in his Peelian principles that the public is the police and the police is the public. And in order for order maintenance to be established in the community, the public has to trust and believe in the authority of the police. And they trust and believe in the authority when you use procedural justice. And a basic example of procedural justice is how you treat people. So I can say to you, Alec, I can say, Alec, get up, get up, get up right now, stand up, stand up. And then I can say to you, hey, can you do me a favor? When you get a second, can I get you to stand up, please? Now, at the end, both of you are standing. So the end result is the same, but how I treated you is very different. So Alec is not going to have a good feeling about me yelling and shouting and swearing at him. Whereas you, when I said to you in a calm voice, hey, when you get a second, can I get you to do me a favor? Can I get you to stand up? Because I treat you with dignity and respect. That's what procedural justice is. How you treat people absolutely does matter. So me rolling into somebody's community, yelling and swearing at them, calling them names, is very different than me rolling into a community and asking, hey, who can tell me what happened here? Who's got an idea of what's going on? What do we need to happen here? It's a very different community if you treat it like that than if you roll in and kick in doors and start slapping people around and screaming at people. So procedural justice, I think, is the future that's going to save policing.
From your description, it sounds like more of a give and take situation where both sides are giving a little bit in order to gain a little bit. And from that kind of perspective, how would you strengthen that bond with the community as a whole? Because in order to give and take, you have to understand where each side is coming for or coming from, their needs and wants.
We have to start with, we talk about reimagining policing a lot. We need to reimagine how we train the police. Because unfortunately, I teach in three academies in three different states. And the one thing we do is we train the police to look out for the bad guy, which to me is problematic. And we always teach that the bad guy is the one that's likely to hurt you. Statistically, when the police are killed, the number one killer of police officers is actually suicide. So the police are more likely to die at their own hands than by the bad guy. The number two killer of police is coronary heart disease, heart attacks because of stress brought about by trauma. The number three killer of police officers is motor vehicle accidents and high speed chasing. You have to go all the way to number four to find the bad guy. But yet we train the police that every single call, that person may be against you. Every person that you encounter is likely to hurt you. So the police are already on guard. They already have this heightened level of awareness around them that I don't think that they should absolutely have. So if we understand that most people aren't the bad guy, most people are just people that make bad mistakes or are victims of crime, then you view policing very differently. And if you notice, I don't use the term law enforcement because law enforcement is just one tool that the police actually have. Enforcing criminal law is a really small part of what the police do. So calling the police law enforcement is like calling me a test grader. Do I grade tests? Absolutely, I do. But there's so much more to being a professor than just grading tests. So law enforcing is only about 10 or 20% of what the police actually do. So the police are service oriented. So if we can get the police to understand their role, understand that your job is to help people, and then they can kind of bring down the temperature a little bit.
You mentioned your work in New Haven. Can you expand on that for us in the Justice Center? Because you've talked about a lot.
So sitting in New Haven, there's a bunch of things going on, but one of them I got a grant from the Department of Justice to look at gun violence reduction. And part of that is we're dealing with police officers and we're taking them through trauma training because the amount of trauma that police go through is pretty extensive. There are studies that show that in the first 4 years of a police officer's career, they see more trauma than a typical person sees in a lifetime. How does that affect you? The more trauma you see, the worse it becomes for you. And a lot of police officers never have an opportunity to deal with their own trauma. And you've heard the term hurt people continue to hurt people. When people are traumatized, when the police have unresolved trauma, then they tend to make mistakes. They tend to be really emotional. They tend to be overly aggressive. And the question that I ask is, I ask, how many police officers have ever done a rape investigation? And everyone raises their hand. And I say, so when you go to a rape victim, how many of you walk right up to that person in their personal space and you physically reach out and put your hand on her? And everyone goes, no, I wouldn't do that. Right. You wouldn't touch a rape victim because you understand her trauma. How differently would you police if you understood the trauma of the community? If we can get police officers to understand community trauma, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, they will realize that a lot of the responses that they're getting aren't anti-police responses, that they're traumatic responses. So when you look at things that cause trauma, poverty causes trauma, homelessness, food insecurity, racism, being bullied, there's a whole bunch of things. And then you stack those one on top of the other. And then here you come now yelling commands at me, and I've already got a traumatic experience. And if I've already seen the police doing bad stuff in the community, if I'm a little kid and my parents have a domestic and they come to arrest my dad, every time I see the police, they're beating up my dad or handcuffing him. Or every time I see the police, they're fighting with people in my community. As a little kid, when I see that, when I grow up, I'm triggered every time I see the police. And I tell the officers, it's not about you personally. It's just people are triggered sometimes by the uniform. And to put it in policing terms, you may not be that bad cop, but based on the way you dress, your uniform, the way you approach, you fit the description. And that's the stuff that I'm doing in the city of New Haven.
So it sounds like there wasn't a lot of training or preparation on how to handle diverse communities. How would you say you're implementing that now?
So I would say they had training on diverse communities, but it was all surface level. And it's only the last few years that we start talking about trauma. That's like a real thing. So police officers are trained that the Muslim community, these are the things that you need to do. And the Hindu Sikh community, these things. And Asian communities. So they got diversity training, but we're not understanding what's wrong with people. Why are people acting the way they are? Why is it that, excuse me, when people dial 911 and call, as soon as you show up, they're really pissed off at you already? We spend time trying to get the police to understand this is the trauma in the community and how you showing up will just trigger a lot of their trauma. And I try to get the police to not take it personally. We don't do a good job with emotion because whenever we see somebody being non-compliant, we automatically assign that the emotion of anger. And when we assign anger, then we decide that this person is likely to be more violent. So we then increase our level of response. But what you interpret as anger may not be anger at all. It could be grief. It could be fear. It could be disgust. There could be a lot of emotions there. And you just aren't doing a good job of interpreting them. The more we get officers to see the negative response you're getting isn't an anti-you thing, it's a trauma response. The way you view the problem dictates the way you view the solution. If you view the problem as this person is being non-compliant, your answer is we're going to be more aggressive. If you view that this person is having a trauma response, then because of procedural justice, we're going to treat them differently. We're going to try to understand their trauma. We're going to slow down. We're going to bring down the aggression. We're going to take a couple of steps back because we still want the officer to be safe. We're going to lower our voice. We're going to try to talk people through stuff. So understanding traumatic responses to me is more important than just cultural competence alone.
So with this switch, would you say officers are becoming? I don't know. My parents they told me officers used to be pillars of the community because they grew up with them, like they lived in the neighborhood. They knew who the police officer was. So would you say there's more of a shift to these officers being community pillars again instead of just law enforcement?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where they are,
Mhm.
because in small towns, that's still the case. In a lot of small communities, there's not a lot of policing, and they live right there. You get a police department the size of Indy Metro or the size of Boston. There are so many cops you don't get to know them. When I was on the job in the sheriff's department, we had 1,200 officers. Half the people I didn't even know who they were. Half the people, I see people in uniform, I give them the what up nod because we have the same patch, but I've never seen them before. So community members have all these officers churning through and they don't get to know them. But because of where I lived in Boston, everybody knew me, everybody knew I was a deputy, everybody could reach out and talk to me. But it's because I lived in the community. And you can't just take people from inside the city because there's not enough people that want to be cops. So there's a lot of suburban people that want to police in the city as well. So now they police in the city, and even if they do a really good job, even if they're really compassionate, at the end of the shift, they get in their car, they drive back to suburbia, and they don't deal with the city residents again until they come back in the next shift.
So do you think you can teach officers that kind of compassion and empathy that are coming from these outsides? Because I grew up in Indianapolis, West Side, downtown. But like
What's
we
sorry?
had officers. Yeah. I'm a Pike High School grad, but we had
Hmm.
officers coming from like Fortville or places 40, 50 minutes. So how do you teach empathy and compassion to or to an officer to this foreign community? This is like a foreign land.
So the short answer, can you teach that? Absolutely. You can teach it by the more you are ingrained in that community. So for me, growing up black and in the inner city, I then was assigned a walking beat in the Italian section of the city. I knew nothing about Italians. I Everybody had greasy hair. They all talked funny. They all, talked with their hands. And everybody owned a restaurant, and the food smelled funny. I knew nothing about them. The more times I spent talking to them, the more times I spent walking around there, stepping in the restaurants, talking to people, then I realized, like my family, they're just trying to do a job and get through. And I didn't view them as those weird outsiders anymore. I just view them as people like us trying to do it. The more you get people to see who you are, the easier it's going to be. I do a lot of volunteer work for the public schools during the summer. And a couple of years ago, I was doing some work with middle schoolers. And I told them, I gave them an assignment. I asked them, how many of you know a police officer? One kid was like, I hate the police. And I said, okay, how many of you don't like the police? He goes, I didn't say don't like, I said hate, I hate them, and blah, 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 blah. So I said, here's your assignment. How many of you ever see the police in your neighborhood? Everybody said, we see them all the time. So I said, the assignment for this week, next time you see a police officer, go up to him and say hi. Pay attention to his name tag. Don't take pictures of him, don't videotape him. Just go up and say hi. That's the whole assignment. And the students were like, that's stupid. Whether or not it's stupid, that's your homework. You don't do it, you don't get credit. So the kid that said he hated the police, when we came back in the next week, he raised his hand. He goes, can I go first? And I said, okay. He said, I saw this cop in my neighborhood. He's this big fat white guy. And he said, I went right up to his face and I said hi to him. I said, what happened? He said, you're never going to believe what happened. I said, what happened? He said hi back to me. And he asked me how school was going. And he asked me what school I went to. And we started talking about sports and stuff. And he says, the cop is a Red Sox fan and I'm a Yankee fan. And we were going back and forth teasing each other. He said, that cop treated me like I was almost a normal person or something. So I said, do you still hate the police? He goes, oh yeah, I still hate the police, just not him. He's really cool. He's mad cool. And the rest of the police I hate. And the one thing we learned, it's hard to hate up close. Once you get to know somebody And he said, a couple of classes later, I said, "Do you ever see that cop?" He goes, "Oh yeah, he stops and talks to me all the time." And he said, every time the Red Sox beat the Yankees, he comes by my house and waits for me just so he can tease me about that. And he goes, "He's mad cool." If we can get the police and community members to interact with each other in a non-enforcement way, then people realize that cops are just regular people trying to do a job. And the police will realize community members aren't all suspects and perpetrators, that they're regular people just trying to live their lives. And the more we can get people together like that, then the easier it's going to be for us to fix stuff.
So, what would you say the biggest influence on how to perceive policing is then for most people, or what they're subjected to see? For example, like I said earlier, me growing up, I saw what I saw in the community. That's what influenced my perspective on policing. But now with body cams, everyone else can see everything as well. So, how do we influence this new perspective?
Well, that's part of it. Part of it is what you see on social media. We have the 24-hour news cycle. Everyone's got a camera. Everyone's on IG. Everyone's on TikTok. And we put up bad images. But the more you interact with the police individually, the more you have conversations. And if you get a cop that you talk to on occasion, I'll ask them, say, "Hey, I saw this video. What do you think of this? The police beating these people down like that." Most officers will say, "Yeah, that was a little over the top. He shouldn't have done that." So most police officers, when they see things like George Floyd murder, most cops are like, "Yo, he shouldn't have done that." So the more you talk to them, if you don't talk to them, you just assume all cops are like that, and this is what the police do. But the fact that most black cops that I talked to told me they were so ashamed of what Derek Chauvin did that they were wondering whether or not policing is what they should be doing. So the fact that I would argue the vast majority of police officers are probably good people trying to do a good job. We just don't have that connection. And as much as I could see you as a potential perpetrator or potential suspect, once I start talking to you and hearing your story, then okay, well now you're not as guilty looking to me because now I kind of understand a little bit of your backstory, and if I find out what some of your needs are, I can kind of connect you with different services, so you don't have to do a lot of criminal stuff that you were planning to do. We can get you services other ways.
So, you touched on one of those hot issues where you talk about George Floyd's murder and whatnot, and with race playing a part. As much as people want to be colorblind, race is a thing, it exists, and it has to be acknowledged whether you like it or not. How would you say the acknowledgement of your own race in your policing has affected you for better or worse, and your acknowledgement of your race as you switched into this academic world and how people view you there?
So I do training all over the country. I do about 400 hours of training a year, which is like, running a 10-week academy by myself. Last week, I was in Nebraska doing training. And I tell people, so I did policing for almost 15 years. For the last 25 years of my life, I've been a policing professor. My books are about policing, my research, all the articles that I write, all the training that I do. So for 39 years of my life, I view the world through a policing lens for 39 years. But the truth is, I grew up as a black man in America. So race is still real. And there was one cop who I thought was trying to say the right thing, but he did a misstep and I had to call him on it. He said, "Look, Doc, I just simply don't see race at all." And I said, "Oh, so you've got an eye stigmatism. You can't differentiate shades of color, is what you're telling me. So you've got an eye problem." And he says, "Well, no, that's not the case." I said, "So you absolutely see race. What you mean to say is when I see race, I don't use race as a barrier to me interacting." I said, "That's what you're supposed to say. Because if you get a call that there's an armed robbery in progress and the suspect is male, 6 feet tall, wearing a red jacket, there's more information that you need, right? Don't you want to know the guy's race? Doesn't that help?" So if you find out that it's a white guy with red hair, All the people of color, you don't even have to ask them things. Same scenario. You get a call that there was a hit and run, and they said the vehicle that hit my car was a 2024 Lexus RX 350 four-door SUV. What more information do you need? How about the color of the car? That's really important to cut out a whole bunch of other stuff. So you do see race. We use race in policing as a descriptor. If you use race as a predictor of criminality, not only is that ineffective, but it's also criminal. And I try to get the police to see that. And as a black man, me talking about issues of race, a lot of white cops want to be really PC about it. I said, let's just be open and honest. Let's talk, let's put it out here. Because I tell them, in the classroom is where I want you to make the mistakes. In the classroom is where I want you to say the dumb stuff. I want you to say the non-PC stuff. Because when you go out in the street, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, Lorenzo mentioned that. Okay, now I know how to better interact with people. So the race issue is real, but also understand as a black man, as much as my whole life has been policing, I've been black a lot longer than I've been connected to policing. So I also view the world through that lens, and I see what the police do to my people. That's why I work so hard to counterbalance what goes on. Race is still real. And with the current administration, not to be ultra political, but the current administration is doing a lot of race baiting and wants us to fight each other on this horizontal plane, but to ignore all of the financial gains that they're getting. They're making all this extra money. They're cutting all this stuff from black and brown people and poor people. But as soon as we call them out on that, then they want us to fight on the race plane. So if we move beyond what race is and look at the real problems, then we can move forward. And again, the way you view the problem dictates the way you view the solution.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking resonates with me because I said grew up in somewhat similar situations, even though Boston, Indianapolis. So, how do you deal with the community itself seeing you as a black police officer? Because I know I have family members, even myself sometimes can catch myself thinking things about that. So, how do you deal with those situations and like opening up about that?
So just deal with people head on. A lot of times they'll say, look, you're just like the white cop and you're worse because you're doing this to the black people and this and that. So I walk over and let's talk me through this. Let me explain to you what's going on. And once they see what I'm trying to do, this person is harming our community. We need to cut out the amount of harm. We're going to treat him with dignity and respect. We're going to treat him like an adult. We're going to use procedural justice and how we deal with him, but everybody has to be held accountable for their actions. And my job is to help hold people accountable so that we have a better community. And the more they understand that my objective is not to arrest black people, but my objective is to make the community stronger and to make the community safer, then they tend to buy into it. Not when they're angry. When they're angry, they just need to vent. They want to vent, they want to say their stuff. And for me, it's not personal. And they're swearing at me, giving me expletives, giving me racist stuff. For me, it's not personal. People say, your mother's so and so. And I'm like, yeah, that's not true. My mom did not do that. And you were not with my mom last night. She was with my dad. So calm down, bro. It's not like that. But for me, it's not personal because the more people come at me with all this personal stuff, if I fight back, then I'm just as bad as they are. And the fact that I know what they're saying is not true and they need to vent. Once they vent and they know that I'm not going to pop back at them, eventually most people will come and apologize because I realize it's not personal. It's not about me. The person I'm dealing with, they don't know me. They don't know my family. They just need to vent because they're going through a traumatic experience. I understand the traumatic response, so I get to deal with it as a traumatic response, and I give them space to do that. Once they calm down, once they get through what they're dealing with, now we can deal with the issue. You call me all these names, you spit at me, you talked about my mother, all this stuff. Now, how can I help? What can I do to make this situation better for you? Because all that other stuff, that wasn't personal. That wasn't about me at all.
That's actually a great way to put it, especially learn how to diffuse situations like that because, like we talked about, your job is so subjective and emotions are always running high. One of the movements behind these things is like defunding the police. But in our class, you talked about how we could also reallocate how the police funds things and the certain responses. So could you talk about instead of defunding the police, because which I highly doubt that will happen, how the police can effectively use their funds in less militant ways, but in more of community outreach ways.
So let me repurpose that term. Defunding the police does not necessarily mean taking money away from the police so that the police don't have money. Defunding the police means instead of adding more money to just put police on patrol, let's take that money and put it elsewhere. Because the Kansas City Preventative Patrol experiment tells us that simply adding police on routine patrol does nothing to affect crime rates. We know that. So instead of hiring 25 more cops, why don't we hire 10 or 12 more cops and then hire 10 or 12 social workers to help deal with some of the stuff that's in there? Because a significant number of calls that the police take, you don't need somebody with arrest power. You don't need somebody with a gun. The vast majority of calls that happen, people need services. And again, I can send the police to a 40-hour training and have them get information, or I can hire a social worker that has a master's degree in social work and 3,000 hours of clinical and assign them to the police department and have them roll out with the police and handle most of the calls. And that's the one thing that Indy Metro has done really, really, really well. 15 years ago, I was working with Indy Metro as they were rolling this out. So the defund the police is actually resource reallocation. And the police always want more cops. That's always the answer. But for me, it's they say because of the amount of calls that we get, we need more officers. My point is, why don't we give you fewer calls? Because some of the calls that you get aren't police calls at all. We can reallocate those calls to social workers, and then you don't need more officers. Now you can focus on being the police, and you don't have to deal with raising people's kids and deal with grandmothers that are missing or deal with the uncle that's not on his meds. That's not a policing issue. We've got social services to handle that now.
That's a way I think a lot of people don't really hear about or talk about because even though I grew up in Indianapolis, it's not something I even heard about. Because like I said, you always see the uniform, you don't see what else happens around that. Would you say social or the police could use social media in a way to promote things like this? Like, hey, we're using these funds to do this instead of you see on social media, like, for example, no offense to Georgia State Police, but Georgia State Police posting about like brand new cars, things like that. You could post more community outreach instead of like, you know,
So there's a document, the final report on 21st century policing. If
mhm.
you haven't read it and you're writing a policing paper, access the document. If you Google it, it's a free document. The Department of Justice put it out in 2015. It ushers police into the 21st century. There are 6 pillars. Pillar one, building trust and nurturing legitimacy. Building trust and nurturing legitimacy is the underlying principle between the relationship between the police and the communities that they serve. If you move to pillar three is technology and social media. Pillar three talks about using social media to tell the community what's going on, to interact with the community. Some departments do it well. In Connecticut, the state police will shut down a highway if somebody loses a contact lens. The whole interstate shut down. But the state police in Connecticut will push out on social media, this roadway is closed. These are the routes to go around it. Also, in my book in chapter 7, I do a highlight of Arlington, Texas Police Department, and their police chief, who happens to be my frat brother, he uses social media to tell community members, this is the problem, this is what the resource we're going to do, and this is what you should expect. So this is the crime, this is our strategy, and this is how it's going to affect you. And now people know when I see the police, I'm not wondering what's going on because they already told me what's going on. So if police do a better job of using social media, it would help. The biggest issue with police is they do a lot of good stuff that nobody knows about because they don't have a good mechanism for telling people. If they adopted community policing and they adopted social media, then they would roll all that stuff out and there'd be a lot fewer disagreements.
With the programs you do, I feel like that works towards a lot of what we're trying to fix, or what you're trying to fix specifically, or what the people want fixed.
Mhm.
How would you say you can ensure that these programs last? Because you mentioned the current administration, and we're not here to get political, like you said, but just changes are being made, especially when it comes to things like race. So, how do you ensure that these programs that are here to protect these minorities that interact with the police the most often?
Regardless of what happens in Washington, regardless of what happens at the state level, the
Mm,
bottom line is if a police officer is engaged in the community, then they already know they're protecting their people anyway, because these are friends. Community members become friends of theirs. So then they get to interact with them. So it doesn't matter what's happening out there. My job is to look out for you. And if I see something's going to happen and it's going to negatively affect Alec, I'm going to reach out and say, hey, Alec, this is what you need to do. If you're doing this, you need to stop. You need to do this or this is going to happen. I'm going to look out for you because my ultimate goal is not to make arrests. My ultimate goal is to solve problems before they become crimes. My ultimate goal is to make communities safer. So, regardless of what they say in Washington, the people in my zone, the people in my beat, the people in my community, I already have an interaction with them. I already have a relationship with them. So, the stuff that comes out of Washington is not going to matter because it's, when the president makes a bunch of his executive orders, it doesn't affect me and my friends because we already have a relationship with each other and we work together. The same thing with police. The more they are ingrained in community policing, and community policing is not a strategy, it's a philosophy, it's a way of viewing your job. And community policing should be the thread woven through the very fabric of your agency. And when I talk to police departments, let's say if they have 100 cops and they tell me, well, 10 of our officers are assigned to community policing, to me, that means 90 of your cops are not. Every single interaction that the police has with the community is another chance to increase community policing every single time. So the more we can do that, the more we can do engagement, the more we can get police officers and community members together outside of an enforcement thing, the better it is for everybody.
I will say my understanding of policing, at least from like behind those doors, is what I've seen from like The Wire. I'm not gonna lie. So it's more of like a fraternity, this kind of like because you guys only go through things only you guys can truly understand that happen. So how do you get things like police unions to play roles in these reform efforts to get everybody on board? Because with policing, you have to it's a you guys stick together, and rightfully so, because you have to protect each other, trust one another. So how do you get a huge change through the department on these beliefs you're talking to me about?
Same with the wire analogy. There's a lot of times that Bunk Moreland disagreed with the stuff that McNulty was doing. There's a lot of times that Bunk had to pull McNulty's chain and say, you can't do this. So you even see that in The Wire. But the bottom line is when you talk about police unions, a union is a group of people. It's not an individual entity. The more we can get the individuals to understand what's going on, then the whole police department is going to go in that direction as well. The more we can get command staff to hold people accountable and tell them you cannot run over people's rights. You cannot just snatch up people because they're eyeballing you on the street. The more individuals can understand they need to change, then the police department as a whole is going to change.
And with this ground up, would you just first of all, would you describe this ground up reform like a new? Well, yeah, we describe this as 21st century policing, new versions of policing. So to me, this sounds like a ground up reform. So close to a revolution, but people don't like that word because it's kind of but
Mm.
a changing of thought in policing. How can departments better recruit and retain officers who are committed to reform and this community engagement?
It's all in how you recruit. So I've got a buddy in a department in Arizona, and I won't say the name of the department. I just saw they had an advertisement. They're trying to hire more cops. So they had a line of about 4 or 5 police cars and police motorcycle, and hovering behind it was the police helicopter. Then everybody's in SWAT gear. And I called, and I was like, hey, Chief, what the hell are you doing? Are you trying to fight a war? This is a very aggressive view of policing. Instead, what if you had a woman, a black person, Latinx person, and a police polo shirt standing in the community smiling? Then you're going to get different types of people. But if you have the aggressive look in your ad, it's going to attract the people that want to kick butts and take names. If you start recruiting differently and show the police interacting with young people, the police talking to senior citizens, the police smiling, then you're going to attract different types of people. So they have to understand what they're going for. And I think that's starting to change a little bit, but you gotta recruit what you want. If you recruit the ultra aggressive people and then tell them I need you to have a softer edge, that's not going to work, and they're going to not like their job, and they're not going to be effective. If you are able to recruit people that are community minded, that are service minded, then you're going to get a whole different department.
So, what advice would you give to young people that are interested in joining the police department, especially people of color? Or
It's
you,
an excellent career. It's not just a job, it's a career. It's a chance for you to make a difference. And I tell people every time you see the police doing something that you don't like, you go on the job and be the change. Be the change that you want to see. You start treating people better. You roll into people's communities, call them ma'am, call them sir. Stop yelling at people. You show people around you that you can be an effective officer without yelling and screaming at people. So you want to make a difference? This is the perfect place to make a difference. Every single day, you get to make a difference if you go into policing. And chances are you're going to be able to do it in black and brown communities.
all righty. This has been a powerful discussion, a great conversation with you, especially a black man of color, about hard topics that must be talked about. Is there
Yes.
anything you would like to put out there about community policing that people should hear?
A lot of the negative interaction that we see with police is born out of police trauma. Up until recently, we weren't able to talk about that. Pillar 6 of 21st century policing is officer wellness and safety. The wellness comes first. And the quote from Pillar 6, the bulletproof cop doesn't exist. We have to protect those that protect us. We have to protect them from the debilitating of mental, physical, and emotional effects of the job, much in the same way we have to protect them from the bad guy. Understand cops have bad days too. Understand cops have trauma too. And for me, when I was on the job, my daughters were little girls. And if I went and saw a car accident that had little kids, that would break me. And there was just some stuff that I can't deal with. The fact that now we can tell them it's okay to take a step back, it's okay to take a break. Let police be human. Let the police talk about their emotions. Let's try to fix police because we usually treat the police as a monolithic group. Like they're all the same, they're all robots, they're all automatrons. When we realize these are just regular folk that are trying to do a really hard job, that see some really bad stuff, we have to give them a little bit of space as well. We have to be able to talk them through stuff. I mean, there are times when the police are really agitated, and instead of you going back and sticking your finger in the cop's face, you take a break and take a step back and say, let's lower the temperature here. And the one thing I used to do a lot, I used to apologize a lot to people. I see what you're saying. Let me apologize that happened. It had nothing to do with me, but I understand. Let me apologize. And when the police are yelling and screaming, I'm going to say, hey, it looks like you're not in a good mood. Let me apologize that I amped you up. Let me just bring it down. Does it make me a punk because I apologize? What happens is I apologize, I brought down the temperature, and now he doesn't have his knee on my neck. Understand the police have traumatic responses as well. Much of what they do isn't about you personally, a lot of it is their trauma. If we can deal with the police trauma, then we can help them be better officers.
Right. Once again, thank you for this conversation and thank you for having us here. This has been a great conversation. Once again, we want to give a special thank you, Dr. Warren Gordon, everyone involved in making this project happen. And we'll cut that right there.